They lowered my wife into the ground on a Tuesday afternoon while the sky tried its best to spit us all out of this world. The cemetery sits on a low hill on the edge of town, exposed to every wind that comes barreling across the fields. That day, the wind brought sleet with it, stinging little needles that worked their way under my collar and down my spine. My black overcoat was no match for the cold, but the chill inside my chest had nothing to do with the weather. It was the moment when the Bacchus engine went quiet, and the funeral director nodded to the minister, that I realized we were out of excuses. Reverend Cole looked at the road again before turning back to me. His white hair was plastered to his forehead where the umbrella didn't quite cover. He spoke softly, like he was afraid his voice might crack something fragile inside me. "Do you want to wait a few more minutes for Daniel and Olivia Egger?" I looked past him at the narrow lane that wound up from the highway. Empty. No headlights, no crunch of tires on gravel, no familiar cars rushing to beat the clock. Just gray sleet dancing in the wind and 2 or 3 old friends huddled under black umbrellas, pretending not to notice that my children were missing. My hand went to my pocket out of habit, feeling the cheap plastic of my flip phone. I had checked it so many times in the last hour that my thumb had worn a groove into the side button. No missed calls, no texts, nothing from my son or my daughter. I swallowed. My throat felt raw and old. "No, Reverend," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, hoarse and thin. My children, they're where they feel they need to be. I had no idea yet just how true that was. He hesitated a heartbeat, then opened his Bible. The words he read were ones I had heard a dozen times at other people's funerals. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. They floated over the open grave, got snatched away by the wind, and fell somewhere behind us in the wet grass. I tried to listen. I really did. But every few seconds my eyes slid to my watch, the old one Margaret gave me for our 40th anniversary. The crystal was fogged from the damp air. 2:15. The graveside service was supposed to start at 2. Our friends shifted their weight, their shoes sinking into the soft ground. I could feel their pity on my back like another coat. Poor Edgar. Poor old man. First he loses Margaret, and now his children can't even show their faces. Sleet peppered the polished mahogany lid of Margaret's casket. They hadn't let me see her when they closed it. Said it would be too much. As if there was anything left in this world that could hurt me more than not hearing her voice again. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a ridiculous second, hope flared in my chest like a match in a dark room. Maybe they were finally calling, saying there'd been a wreck on the interstate, a flat tire, something. Some reason that would make sense. That Margaret would forgive. I fumbled with the phone, my fingers stiff from the cold. The tiny screen glowed blue under the brim of my hat. It wasn't a call, it was a text. The bank's number glared up at me. Security alert. Wire transfer request initiated, $200 pending co-signer authorization. Description: Earnest Money, Lakeshore Ridge Estates. Joint borrowers Daniel Mercer and Olivia Mercer. Source: Margaret Mercer Family Trust. The time stamp read 200 p.m., 2 o'clock sharp. Exactly when Reverend Cole had started the first prayer over Margaret's grave. The world narrowed to those lines of text. I read them twice, 3 times, the words not changing no matter how hard I stared. I could feel the sleet on my face, but it was far away, like I was watching myself from a distance. Earnest Money. Lakeshore Ridge Estates. My children's names. My wife's trust. They hadn't called me because they were in a conference room somewhere, sitting in leather chairs, smiling across polished wood, talking about walk-in closets and lake views. They were signing for a house. A dream home. They'd been putting pictures of in my face for months, and they were using Margaret's money as the ticket to get in. They thought I would see this alert, squint at it with my old eyes, sigh, and press whatever button made the noise stop. They thought I was just a grieving old man pressing OK on any screen I couldn't read without my glasses. They forgot I spent 40 years building machines that would rip a man's arm off if you misread a single number on the blueprint. They forgot I built things by microns, not by guesswork. Edgar. Reverend Cole's voice floated in again. Would you like to say a few words before we continue? I closed the phone without answering the bank. The screen went dark, but the message burned behind my eyes. I slid it back into my pocket like I was hiding a weapon from myself. No, I said quietly. My tongue felt thick. Just finish it, Reverend. He nodded and went back to his verses. I didn't hear them. All I heard were all the things my children had said in the past week. Dad, Mom would want us settled. We'll talk after the funeral. Dad, stop worrying about money. It's just paper. Mom wanted us to enjoy life. Dad, there's some paperwork we'll bring by. Don't stress over it. We'll handle it. Olivia had put her hand over mine last night when I reached for the folder on the kitchen table, laughing that high, brittle laugh of hers. Daddy, you don't need to read all that stuff. It'll just upset you. Upset me. The funeral director handed me a small shovel, all silver shine and velvet handle, like grief was something delicate. I didn't take it. I stepped past him and grabbed a clump of wet earth with my bare hand. The cold mud oozed between my fingers. I looked down into the grave. The casket looked smaller from here, like a jewelry box someone had dropped in a hole. I'll look after your money better than I looked after my parenting, I whispered, so quiet the wind almost took the words away. I promise you that, Margaret. The first handful of dirt hit the lid with a dull, ugly thud. It sounded like a book closing. When it was over, when the last prayer was said and the last nod was given, the others drifted back to their cars, sliding glances at me, then away. No one knew quite what to say to a man whose children had chosen a bank over a burial. Reverend Cole lingered, his Bible clutched to his chest. If you need anything, Edgar, he said, even just someone to talk to. I'll be all right. I lied. Thank you for coming. He squeezed my shoulder and left me alone with the open hole in the muck. I walked back to my pickup, my legs heavy, the wet grass clinging to my shoes. When I slid into the driver's seat, the old vinyl creaked like it always had. The familiar smell of oil and dust wrapped around me, anchor and reminder both. I started the engine. The wipers smeared the sleet across the windshield in slow, tired arcs. The road from the cemetery hits the highway after a quarter mile. One ramp takes you back into town. The other curves out toward the new developments on the far side of the lake, where houses have names like The Summit, and The Overlook, and Lakeshore Ridge Estates. I watched the sign grow in the wiper's rhythm. WESTCITY, East Lacasaur. The bank's text vibrated against my ribs again, a silent reminder waiting for my answer. If they wanted to build their future on her grave, I wanted to see the foundation. I took the east ramp. The road out to Lakeshore Ridge was all new asphalt and shiny guardrails, the kind of smooth black ribbon that didn't exist when Margaret and I first came to this town. My old truck hummed along, wipers beating time. And somewhere between the cemetery and the lake the years started to fold back on themselves. I could still see the first shop we ever had. It wasn't even a building, really. Just a drafty cinderblock garage behind an abandoned gas station with one good workbench and 2 welding helmets we bought secondhand. It was 1974, and we were young enough to think coffee and determination could make up for experience. Margaret stood there that first week in her coveralls, hair tied up in a red bandana, looking at the empty shelves like she was seeing them filled already. I can still hear her voice bouncing off those cold walls. "We won't always be strong, Ed," she said, tapping the ledger she'd picked up from the dime store. "Money won't love us, but it'll keep a roof over us when our backs give out." I laughed back then, told her my back would never give out. I was 22 and thought steel was the only thing that bent in this world. She just smiled that patient smile and started writing numbers in her little book. "We'll put something aside every quarter," she said, "no matter how small. Promise me." So we did. When jobs came in, when they didn't, when the heater broke and we were working in gloves, we still folded a few crumpled bills into the cigar box on the high shelf. Later, when the box became a bank account, we kept doing it. Margaret treated that account like a third child, watched, guarded, worried over. When Daniel was born, we brought his bassinet into that garage and set it under the office window where the dust wouldn't settle too thick. He slept through the clang of metal and the scream of grinders like he'd been born to noise. 2 years later it was Olivia, pink and tiny, her crib wedged next to the filing cabinet with invoices taped to the side. We didn't have vacation pictures back then. We had photos of Margaret holding a baby in one arm and a welding torch in the other. When her Aunt Lillian died, Margaret came home from the lawyer's office with a manila envelope clutched like it might fly away. We sat at our rickety kitchen table and poured out the contents. "It isn't much," she said, eyes shining anyway. "But it's a start." Aunt Lillian hadn't been rich, but she'd had no husband, no children, and a paid-off little bungalow upstate. After the sale and the accounts, what was left was more money than either of us had ever seen on a single piece of paper. "We should pay off the truck," I said. "Fix the roof. Maybe finally get you that new stove." "We'll do some of that," she answered. "But most of this goes away where we can't touch it." That's when she started talking about a trust. I thought trusts were for people with names on buildings, not two grease-stained kids who rented their house. Margaret disagreed. "We're not always going to be young Ed," she said again. "And the kids, well, they'll need something behind them when we're gone. Something we didn't have." So she dragged me to a lawyer's office downtown, and we sat under humming fluorescent lights while a man in a brown suit explained words like revocable and beneficiaries. They set up the Margaret Mercer Family Trust with Aunt Lillian's money as the seed, and as the years went by, whenever we sold a machine or landed a big contract, she'd peel off a portion and send it there. When we finally sold the shop building itself, after I hurt my shoulder and couldn't work the machines like I used to, a big chunk of that went into the trust too. We moved the business to a smaller rented unit, let the kids talk us into slowing down. By then, that little seed had grown. Conservative investments, Margaret called them. Boring on purpose. No casino stocks, no wild schemes. Just things that crept up a little each year. Last time I looked closely, the statement said it was just about $1 million. It wasn't for yachts or marble countertops. Margaret was clear about that. It was for emergencies, if one of us got sick. It was for college funds for grandchildren we barely saw. It was for making sure neither of us ended up in some county home with flickering lights and indifferent nurses. It was never, not once in any conversation, for buying my children a palace they couldn't afford. Daniel always had a way with people. Teachers loved him even when he didn't turn in his homework. He could slide out of trouble with a joke and a dimpled smile that he got from his mother. When he got older, that smile moved him from one startup to another, always chasing the next big thing. There was always going to be a stock option, an IPO, a bonus, just around the corner. "What about a steady job?" I'd ask. "Benefits? A pension?" He'd roll his eyes like I'd suggested we go back to horse and buggy. "Dad, nobody does that anymore. You build, you scale, you cash out. Don't worry, when my ship comes in, I'll buy you and Mom a place on the beach." The trouble was, his ship kept sinking out of sight, and somehow it was always the dock workers footing the bill. Olivia was different. As a little girl, she'd fill notebooks with sketches, draw dresses on the backs of invoices. We thought maybe she'd be a designer. Instead, she became a sort of brand. Phones, cameras, followers. She turned her life into a stream of pictures and captions. Brunches, outfits, vacations she put on credit. "Content, Dad," she'd say, pointing her phone at her plate while Margaret and I sat across from her at the diner once a year. "It's how you build a platform." Her platform always seemed to need a little help. Around the holidays, though. Card bills, rent she'd fallen behind on, a temporary cash flow issue, when a sponsor forgot to pay on time. Margaret watched it all and still, for a long time, she defended them. "They'll grow out of it," she'd say when I grumbled over a bounced check with Daniel's name on it. "Once they have kids, they'll understand." When they came to us about the restaurant, that ridiculous, doomed restaurant in a neighborhood even the mailman avoided, every instinct I had screamed no. The numbers didn't make sense. The rent was too high, the chef too green, the menu too clever for the locals. "They just need one good break," Margaret whispered to me in bed that night. We had people take chances on us. Remember? I remembered, all right. I also remembered every month of sweating payroll, of praying the lathe wouldn't die on us. But she had that look in her eye, the one that said if I stood firm I'd be standing alone. So I played the bad cop. I said no. Then, after a week of phone calls and tears, I caved. We loaned the money from Margaret's personal savings, not touching the trust. Just this once. The restaurant closed 8 months later. We never saw a penny back. That was one of many times I promised myself I'd be tougher next time, that I wouldn't let my guilt and her softness open our wallets. And every time, somehow, we ended up back at the bank. I wasn't stupid. People like to think machinists are just hands and no head, but you don't hold tolerances to a thousandth of an inch without understanding how things fit together. Blueprints, contracts for industrial presses, supplier agreements. I read every line when it was my shop on the line. At home, though, when Margaret slid a stack of papers across the table and said, "Just sign where I tabbed it. Ed, it's the trust stuff." I skimmed. I trusted her eyes more than mine, especially after the chemo started. Those last months, she was the one still trying to keep the kids between us, even when they weren't there. She'd sit in the recliner, blanket up to her chin, phone in her hand. Olivia says she's swamped with a campaign. She'd say, covering for another missed visit. Daniel's flying, poor thing. These jobs today, they never stop. I knew better. But every time I opened my mouth, she'd shut me up with a look. "Don't you dare make me choose between you and them," she'd whisper when the pain was bad. Not now. About a year before she died. She asked me to come with her to Halpern's office, our lawyer downtown. She wore her good wig and that navy dress she said made her look less like a scarecrow. In that little conference room with the fake plant in the corner, she signed some new papers with a shaky hand. Then Halpern turned the last page toward me. "This amendment keeps control with you, Edgar," he said, "in case the beneficiaries aren't ready." I remember frowning at the paragraph full of discretion and fiduciary, and thinking it sounded like more of the same. Margaret squeezed my knee under the table. "It just tightens things, she said. "So nobody can rush you. You sign if you're comfortable, otherwise you don't. That's all. You always handled the long words," I told her, taking the pen. "If you say it's good, I believe you." She gave me a look then, something complicated and sad, and for a second I thought she might say more. Instead, she just nodded. Driving toward Lakeshore Ridge, that memory came back with a clarity that made my fingers tighten on the wheel. She saw more than I wanted to see, and I signed my name right under hers. The sleet had thinned to cold rain by the time the subdivision's entrance loomed up ahead. A white stone wall curved along the roadside, the name, Lac Sr. Regis, carved deep and painted in gold. Above it, a billboard showed a smiling family on a deck overlooking a perfect blue lake, wine glasses in their hands. "Live like royalty," the slogan read. Margaret used to snort every time we drove past that sign. "Palaces for people who borrow their crowns," she'd mutter. "All hat, no cattle." I slowed as I turned between the stone pillars, my wipers smearing the image of that glossy family into a blur. Somewhere in here, my own children were trying on crowns with her name engraved on the inside. I was about to see who was wearing mine. By the time I reached the main drag that cut through Lakeshore Ridge, the clouds had thinned to a low, dirty ceiling, and the rain had settled into a steady gray curtain. The old truck rattled a little on the new asphalt, like it knew it didn't belong in a place this polished. The sales center sat on a corner lot just past the gate, all glass and angles, shining like a fishbowl under bright lights. Big white balloons bobbed from posts along the sidewalk tied with gold ribbon. A banner stretched over the entrance in cheerful letters.
PS is chewed almost.
Almost sold out, I thought. Funny how there was always just one thing left, just one last chance, whenever a salesman started talking. I didn't pull into their pristine little parking lot with its painted lines and EV chargers. I parked down the street, half up on the damp grass, between a fertilizer truck and a contractor's van. My truck looked more at home there, among things that actually did work. For a minute I just sat with the engine ticking as it cooled, fingers resting on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to turn around, go home, crawl into Margaret's recliner, and pretend I'd never seen that bank text. But I've spent my whole life walking up to noisy machines and taking off the guards to see why they were rattling. I couldn't unlearn that now. I got out, pulled my coat tighter, and walked toward the glowing box of the sales center. Through the glass I could already see movement, bright colors, a big digital screen on the far wall showing a house with more windows than walls. The automatic doors whooshed open when I stepped onto the mat, and warm, perfumed air hit me in the face. The place smelled like citrus and new carpet. "Good afternoon!" "Welcome to Lakeshore Ridge," a young woman chirped from behind a white reception desk. Her smile was so wide I could see every tooth. She wore a headset and a name tag that said, Kelsey. I pushed some rain off my hat. Just looking. I lied. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about. Of course, she said, already glancing past me toward the entrance again, as if a more promising commission might walk in behind me. Feel free to grab a brochure. Our agents are in appointments right now, but I can see if. Her words blurred into the background as my eyes tracked past her, through the glass wall that separated the lobby from the inner office. There, at a glossy conference table, sat my son and daughter. Daniel had his back to me, suit jacket draped over the chair. White shirt bright under the recessed lights. He leaned forward on his elbows, hands moving as he talked. Olivia was opposite him, her hair perfect, her nails flashing as she gestured at something on the table. Between them and the far wall sat two men I'd never seen before. One wore a slim navy suit and a tie that probably cost more than my entire outfit. The other had a slightly cheaper suit and a laptop open in front of him. In front of each of them was a leather folder embossed with gold letters. VIP en bois. Kelsey followed my gaze. Oh, she said. That's our Lakeshore signature package presentation. They're in the middle of a consult. But if you'd like to schedule. I'll just look around, I said, stepping to the side before she could pen my name on anything. There was a big fake ficus tree planted in a white pot near the glass wall. I drifted toward it, moving slow, like an old man just killing time. From behind the glossy leaves, I could see and hear plenty. My father's the trustee, Daniel was saying, his voice taking on that confident, practice tone I'd heard him use on waiters and mechanics. The money's basically already ours. We just need to push the paperwork through. The man in the navy suit, sales agent by the look of him, nodded, steepling his fingers. That certainly simplifies things, he said. His smile was polite, but his eyes were sharp. With that kind of liquidity, we can move very quickly. Olivia laughed, that light, tinkling sound she always put on when she thought people were watching. We'll move in by Christmas, she said. I can already see it. Mom hated that old house anyway. Too many memories. She loved that house. I murmured under my breath. She hated your spending. If anyone heard me, they didn't show it. The other man, the one with the laptop, cleared his throat. We do have a tight timeline, he said. Rates are locked for 48 hours. After that, we'll need to resubmit your application, and with some of these variables. He tapped the screen. I can't guarantee we'll get as favorable terms. Salesman nodded. We had another party interested in this model, he added smoothly. But with your $1 million in liquid assets, this should be easy. We just need your father's co-signature on the trust authorization today or tomorrow at the latest. My stomach twisted. It sounded clinical out of his mouth. My wife's life work boiled down to liquid assets. On the screen mounted to the wall behind them, an image changed. The agent had picked up a remote and was clicking through a slideshow. Up came the house. Not just any house. The house. Here's the Lakeview Summit plan, he said, his tone warming. This is the lot you've reserved. Unobstructed Lakeview southern exposure. 3-car garage. As you can see, the infinity pool looks right over the water. The image shifted. Open concept kitchen with an island like a runway, a media room with tiered seating, a rooftop deck strung with little lights like a fairy tale. Olivia clasped her hands under her chin. And that wine cellar, she breathed. Oh my God. We could do tastings down there. And the rooftop. I can picture the New Year's Eve party already. We'll do a celebration livestream the day we move in. Honoring Mom's legacy with a mansion she'd be proud of. She smiled like she'd already written the caption. Seemed to me they'd figured out how to honor her legacy before they'd even put her in the ground. And the price point, the mortgage man was saying, is 2.3. With your down payment of $1 million from the trust, we'd finance the balance with this adjustable product. He turned the laptop so they could see. Introductory rate is very favorable, and by the time it resets, your income trajectories should cover the bump. Daniel waved a hand. I'm due a promotion next quarter anyway, he said. This is a non-issue. And once Dad signs, the money's locked. He can't touch it. My throat went dry. Locked. Can't touch it. Like I was some doddering relative they were kindly sequestering for his own good. The broker chuckled. Well, he'll still be a co-signer on the trust release. he said. But from what you've told me, he raised an eyebrow. Dad signs anything if you put it under his nose, Daniel said easily. He can't see the fine print without Mom. Honestly, we're doing him a favor. Bigger house, we can take care of him when he can't climb the stairs in the old place. They all laughed. All but me, standing behind a fake tree, fingers digging into my palm so hard my nails left marks. On the laptop, a document flashed by. I caught a snippet of language out of the corner of my eye. A's condition waiver. My machinist's brain filed that away immediately. As is on a brand new build. That wasn't standard. Not unless something was wrong they didn't want to fix. No. There is a non-refundable deposit component we discussed, the sales agent said. Should you fail to close, Ridgepoint Developments retains the earnest money. But with your father's signature and your trust structure, I don't foresee an issue. Ridgepoint Developments. I repeated silently, tasting the name. Another piece of the puzzle to set on the bench and examine later. They weren't just dreaming. They were already on the hook. And they were betting my wife's trust, and my supposed confusion, to bail them out. If we can get your father here tomorrow. The agent continued. We can have everything wrapped by end of week. We had an older client last month. Once they see the renderings, they usually fall in love with the idea of leaving a family estate. Oh, he will, Olivia said confidently. I'll tell him we're keeping a room like Mom's old sewing room. He's sentimental. He'll melt. I'll bring the authorization to his house tonight. Daniel added. You'll have it back signed. Don't worry. That was enough. I stepped away from the ficus, out of their line of sight, and walked back toward the entrance. Kelsey looked up, eyes widening a little. Leaving already? She asked. I can get someone too. I've seen what I needed, I said, keeping my voice even. Thank you. Outside, the air hit me like a slap. I walked a few paces past the front window, then stopped and turned back just enough to lift my phone. The camera on that old flip wasn't worth much, but it could capture letters on a wall. I snapped a picture of the sign by the door. Lakeshore Ridge Sales Center, Ridgepoint Developments, Preferred Lending Partner, Horizon Capital Mortgage. The names glowed faintly on the tiny screen. I saved the photo, then shoved the phone back in my pocket and headed for the truck. Inside the cab, I shut the door and sat, hands on my knees. For a long minute, I didn't move. The rain drummed on the roof. The steering wheel blurred. 50 years of scraping and saving, of Margaret counting out coupons at the kitchen table, of my hands cracked and blackened from coolant and steel, and here my children were, trading it all for a wine cellar and an infinity pool. They hadn't even kept a black suit on long enough for the dirt over her to settle. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until stars danced behind my lids. When I dropped them, my palms were damp. All right, I said aloud to the empty seat. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. All right, Ed, enough of that. A crying never fixed a jammed gear. You shut the machine off, you took off the cover. You found the metal shaving that didn't belong. I pulled the phone out again and scrolled to the number I hadn't dialed in years. The law office's recording picked up after 2 rings. A cheerful young voice I didn't recognize offered hours and a menu of options. Eventually it landed me with a human. Halpern and Associates, this is Jenna, the girl said. How can I help you? It's Edgar Mercer, I said. Saying my full name grounded me like I was signing another blueprint. I need to speak to Mr. Halpern as soon as he's free. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Mercer, she said softly. We heard about Mrs. Mercer. Mr. Halpern is in court today, but I can schedule. I don't need a schedule? I cut in, a little harsher than I meant. I took a breath. I need him to look at the trust documents he drew up for my wife. And I need to know exactly what authority my kids think they have. And what I actually have. There was a pause on the line. I'll give him the message right away, she said. Can I tell him it's urgent? It is, I said. Tell him I won't be bullied into moving money I don't understand. Not this time. I hung up before my voice could crack. The sales center's glass box gleamed in my rearview mirror as I started the truck. I watched my own lined face for a second, reflected faintly in the windshield. They wanted a quick signature. I told that old man quietly. They picked the wrong one. Then I put the truck in gear and turned toward home. I knew my children. I knew their rhythm. They'd leave that office pumped full of promises and head straight for the easiest mark. Tonight, they'd come to my house with their, "Dad, just sign this plan." And I would be ready. Their cars were in my driveway before I was. I saw them as soon as I turned onto our street, sleek shapes squatting where Margaret's rose bushes used to be. Daniel's big black SUV with its glossy paint and tinted windows, and Olivia's little white coupe with rims that looked like they'd shatter on the first pothole. Both of them parked at angles half on the lawn, wet grass chewed into muddy ruts. Margaret used to fuss if I left the truck crooked by an inch. I pulled in behind them, my old pickup looking like a farmhand at a cocktail party, and sat for a second with my hand on the key. The porch light was on though the sun hadn't quite gone down, front door hanging just a little open. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, the air smelled like soy sauce, coffee, and some kind of perfume that made my nose itch. Takeout containers were piled on the counter, lids askew, noodles drying into clumps. 2 coffee cups sweated rings on the table without coasters, right on the oak Margaret polished every Sunday. In the dining room, my sturdy old table had been turned into a command center. Daniel's laptop was open, its screen glowing with rows of numbers I couldn't see from the doorway. Papers were spread everywhere, some in neat stacks, some already dog-eared. My pen cup was lying on its side, pens rolling to the edge as if trying to escape. Olivia was pacing in a slow circle between the table and the window, phone pressed to her ear, heels tapping a rapid rhythm on the hardwood. "Yes, yes, I know," she was saying, voice sugar-sweet and a pitch too high. "We'll send the signed doc tonight. I promise. The wire will be in escrow before end of day tomorrow at the latest. My dad's he's having a hard day, you know." She glanced up then and saw me in the doorway. For a second, something like guilt flickered in her eyes. Then she turned slightly away, angling her shoulder as if I couldn't hear her anyway. "He just got back," she said into the phone. "I'll call you after we've talked." Daniel was sitting at the head of the table like it belonged to him, sleeves rolled up, tie undone. He looked up, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and stood. "Dad," he said, arms spreading wide. "There you are." They converged on me like a well-rehearsed act. Olivia ended the call without a goodbye and swept over, arms looping around my neck, her cheek damp against mine. "We were just talking about you," she said, voice catching like it had found a script. "We were so emotionally wrecked we couldn't face the burial. You know, we said goodbye in our hearts, right? We couldn't see her go into the ground." Daniel stepped in on the other side, patting my back with one hand like I was a dog he wasn't sure he liked. "It was too much," he added quickly. "We woke up and both just lost it. We thought about you standing there and we didn't pick up a phone," I said. My coat was still wet, their arms awkward and hot. I stepped back, out of the sandwich, and hung the coat on the back of a chair. They traded a look over my head, a brief flash of annoyance before the masks slipped back on. "Dad," Olivia said, dropping her voice into that careful, coaxing tone people use with scared animals. "We're here now. That's what matters. We'll make it right. Together, okay?" She reached for my hand, guided me toward the chair beside Daniel's laptop. "Sit down," Daniel urged, hand firm on my shoulder. "You look exhausted. Have you eaten? We ordered Chinese. I got you the noodle thing you like." There, on a spare square of tabletop amid the papers, sat a white box with my name written on it in Olivia's looping script. I wondered when they'd started remembering what I liked. Daniel grabbed a thick folder from the stack and dropped it in front of me. It hit the wood with a solid thump. "We do need one tiny favor," he said, already flipping it open. "Well, not even a favor really. Just a formality. A simple authorization for the trust. Mom set this up for us. It's what she wanted." Pages fanned out, dense with text and highlighted sections. My name was on top in big letters, his and Olivia's underneath, and a lot of smaller print swimming between. "Look, Dad," Olivia said, sliding into the chair across from me. She put her elbows on the table like she was leaning in for a secret. "It's just some boring legalese. You know that stuff scrambles your brain. Let us walk you through it." Daniel chuckled, but there was no joy in it. "You remember how Mom handled all the paperwork," he said. "You didn't have to worry about this junk. Just let me translate for you." I looked at the two of them. Daniel's eyes were too bright, pupils a little pinched. Olivia kept smoothing the edge of a napkin over and over, fingers moving fast. "What's the rush?" I asked. My voice came out hoarser than I intended, which seemed to please them. Daniel flipped to a page with colored tabs. "The market's hot," he said. "You saw the place. Houses like this don't sit. We've already put down a huge deposit to hold it. If we don't sign and fund by Friday, we lose it." He tapped a line with his finger. The nail was bitten short. His hand shook, just a tremor. But I'd known those hands since they'd first grabbed my thumb. Olivia leaned forward, eyes wide. "It's non-refundable, Dad," she said solemnly. "It's a lot of money. If you don't sign, we're screwed. Do you want your grandkids to live in a tiny apartment forever? We finally have a chance at a real home. A family estate. Like Mom dreamed of." I thought of my grandson's face on a screen, sticky with jelly, saying, "Hey, Grandpa," twice a year. I'd never heard him complain about his apartment. I picked up the top page, let my eyes blur over the paragraphs. There it was, buried halfway down. In that lawyer language I'd pretended so long to ignore. "Irrevocable transfer of principal," I read aloud slowly. "To designated beneficiaries and/or assignees." Standard wording. Daniel cut in. "All trusts say that. It just means once it's in the house, it's safe. Nobody can take it away from the family." My finger slid along another line. "Here," I murmured. "Assignment of beneficial interest may be made to Ridgepoint Acquisitions, LLC. Who's that?" Olivia's smile wobbled. "It's just the development company," she said quickly. "Don't get bogged down in names, Dad. You'll just confuse yourself. You aren't thinking as clearly as you used to." Daniel added, his tone turning almost gentle. "That's normal at your age. You've had a shock. Let us carry this weight for you. That's why Mom set this up. So we could help." There it was laid out plain. Not help me. Use me. Something unknotted inside me, then retied itself into something harder. I set the paper down carefully and rubbed my temples, making a show of squinting. "These words," I muttered. "They all run together. Always have." My head's pounding. Olivia reached across, patting my hand. "See," she said, half to me, half to Daniel. "This is what I meant. He's exhausted." She turned back to me, voice dropping into a stage whisper I was clearly supposed to overhear. "Honestly, I don't know why he makes everything harder," she said. "Mom would have just signed. She trusted us." I let that one sit a moment, feeling it chip at the inside of my ribs. "Your mother," I said slowly, "read every contract twice. And then she called Halpern. You never noticed because you were too busy asking for the card." Daniel huffed, irritation cracking through his polished persona. "Dad, come on," he said. "Halpern is slow and expensive. We don't need to drag him into everything. This is straightforward. I already went over it with the broker and the developer guy. They're professionals. They know what they're doing." "So does Halpern," I replied. I made my hand tremble as I reached for the next page, then let it fall back. "I can't make sense of this today. It's too soon after losing your mother." I looked up, letting my eyes shine just a little. "Bring this to Halpern's office with me tomorrow. We'll go through it there." Olivia's smile vanished completely. "Tomorrow," she repeated. "Dad, the deadline is Friday. That's, like, now. We don't have time for some old lawyer to nitpick. He'll just confuse you more." Daniel added, leaning in. His voice grew tight, the veneer slipping. "You trust us, don't you? We're your children." I looked at them both. The people Margaret and I had rocked at 3 in the morning. The ones we'd sat up worrying about when they missed curfew. The ones whose every fever had sent us running for the thermometer. "I do," I said softly. "Which is exactly why I want a second set of eyes." Daniel's jaw clenched. A little vein pulsed at his temple. "You're overthinking this," he snapped. "It's a house, Dad, not a bomb. You sign, the money moves, we close. If you drag your feet and we lose the deposit." He let the sentence hang, letting me fill in the disaster. I thought of his shaking hand over that line about non-refundable funds. There was more here than just a lost dream home. Someone had their hooks in him already. "I'm tired," I said, slumping a little further into the chair, letting my shoulders round. "My head isn't right. If this is such a good deal, it'll still be a good deal tomorrow at 9. Olivia pushed her chair back so hard it scraped, the sound sharp. Unbelievable, she muttered, standing. After everything. After Mom. He doesn't trust us. Daniel snapped the folder shut with a crack. Fine, he said, shoving the papers back into his bag. We'll go to Halpern. But if this falls through because you couldn't get over your paranoia. He shook his head. I don't even know what to say to you. You hardly ever do, I said quietly. They grabbed their coats, grumbling to each other under their breath as they headed for the door. Stubborn old man, I heard Olivia hiss. He'd rather we drown in rent than sign one paper. The front door slammed. Their engines roared to life, loud in the quiet street, then faded away. The house felt bigger without the minute. Bigger and emptier. Margaret's blanket was still folded on the back of her chair. I stood for a minute, listening to the ticking of the kitchen clock, my own breath loud in my ears. Then I went to the drawer by the stove and pulled it open. Under the rubber bands and the spare batteries was an old magnifying glass. The cheap kind Margaret used when the print on recipes got too small. I took it to the table, sat in Daniel's abandoned chair, and opened the copy of the draft they'd left behind when they were scrambling to look outraged. Line by line, word by word, I began to read. I didn't sleep that night. After the front door stopped rattling and the sound of their engines faded down the street, the house settled into that old familiar silence. It used to be a comfort, that quiet. Margaret knitting in her chair, the tick of the kitchen clock, the hum of the fridge. Now it just felt like an echo chamber for my thoughts. I took the draft they'd left behind. One of them must have slid an extra copy out of the stack without realizing, and spread it on the dining room table. The same table where we'd had birthday cakes and Thanksgiving turkeys, where Margaret had rolled out pie crusts and balanced checkbooks. I fetched the magnifying glass from the drawer, set my old reading glasses on my nose as well. Double lenses, double stubbornness. Beside me, I set a pad of sticky notes and a ballpoint pen. Let's see what you're so eager for me not to understand, I muttered. Line by line, I went through it. The letters swam a little at first. My eyes are 72 years old. After all, and the day had been long. But if I can file down a machine part by feel until it slides into place with no more than a hair's play, I can trace meaning out of legalese. There was the irrevocable transfer of principle. Language again. I underlined it, slapped a yellow flag next to it. A paragraph later, the part that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Assignment of beneficial interest may be made to Ridgeview Acquisitions, LLC. Ridgeview, I said aloud. It wasn't the same name I'd seen at the sales center, Ridgepoint, but too close to be coincidence. Developments, acquisitions. Shells within shells. I circled the name until the ink bled through the paper. By the time I was done marking up every phrase that smelled wrong, the clock over the stove read 9:30. My hand ached a little from holding the pen. Margaret would have told me to take a break, make some tea. There was no one to tell me that now. Instead, I picked up the phone and scrolled to the number I'd called earlier. Halpern's office had an after-hours message, a polite recording about leaving a detailed reason for your call. I waited for the beep, then took a breath. Nathan, it's Edgar, I said. My voice surprised me, tighter. Somehow, like a wire pulled too far. If you ever trusted me, call me back tonight. It's about Margaret's trust. And our kids. Something's not right. I hung up, set the phone on the table, and went back to my notes. Half an hour crawled past, then another. I started to wonder if he'd switched the number, if my message was floating in some digital void. I was reaching for the light switch when the phone rang. Mercer. I answered, more out of old habit at the shop than anything. Edgar, a familiar voice said. It's Nathan. I got your message. I'm sorry about Margaret. There was real grief in his tone. He'd known her almost as long as I had, on paper at least. Thank you, I murmured. You said something wasn't right, he went on. Tell me. So I did. In short bursts. Without the parts about standing behind fake trees and wanting to put my fist through glass. The funeral they'd skipped, the bank alert. The visit to the sales office. The document they'd slapped on my table tonight. I've got a draft here with language I don't remember ever agreeing to. I finished. Words like irrevocable, an assignment to Ridgeview Acquisitions. And they're acting like I'm the last loose screw to tighten. And Nathan was quiet for a moment. I could hear a TV murmuring in the background. then click off. Bring whatever they asked you to sign, he said finally. And come to my house in the morning, 8 o'clock. We'll pull the original trust file. I'd rather not wait until I'm in the office and have a parade of assistants listening in. I don't want to put you out, I said, though part of me was already grabbing coat and keys. You're not, he replied. Margaret was my client long before you were, and she came to see me on her own last year about that trust. I think we need to talk about that too. When I got off the phone, the house seemed a little less heavy. Not light, exactly, but like I'd finally found the toolbox in the dark. I turned out the kitchen light and went to the bedroom. I lay on top of the covers in my clothes, watching the shadows move on the ceiling, listening to the rain tap the windows. When sleep finally came, it was thin and brittle. Morning brought a washed-out sky and a dull ache behind my eyes. I dressed in my least rumpled shirt, combed what hair I had slick, and tucked the marked-up draft into a folder. Before I left, I paused by Margaret's recliner and touched the worn armrest. Going to see your lawyer, I told the empty chair. The one you trusted more than me, apparently. Nathan's house was an old brick colonial on a tree-lined street near downtown. I'd been there a few times over the years, always with Margaret. He opened the door before I could ring twice. He'd aged since I'd last seen him, same as I had. Thinner hair, a little more stoop in the shoulders, but his eyes were sharp behind his glasses. Edgar, he said, clasping my hand in both of his. Come in, come in. His home office was exactly what you'd picture when you think lawyer. Walls lined with books, framed certificates. A big desk that looked like it had been there since the 70s. No receptionist. No humming copier. Just a desk lamp, a computer, and a stack of neat red folders. Sit, he said, nodding toward a leather chair. Let's see what they brought you. I slid the folder across. He opened it, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. His brow furrowed almost immediately. Who drafted this? He asked. The mortgage guy, I said. Daniel said some lawyer for the developer helped. Nathan grunted. Not anybody I know. And certainly not anyone who has your interests at heart. He kept reading, lips tight, marking sections with his fingertip. This, he muttered, and this, and here. They've tucked it in under an administrative simplification heading. He glanced up at me. Do you see what they're doing here? I see them trying to make me feel stupid, I said. Past that, you'll have to translate. He reached for another folder from his desk, thicker, with my name and Margaret's in neat handwriting on the tab. He flipped it open, pulled out a set of documents with blue covers. A year before she passed, he said, Margaret came to see me alone. She said she wanted to tighten some bolts, as she put it. Do you remember coming in to sign an amendment? I remember her in that navy dress, I said slowly, saying she was tired of loose ends. You slid paper toward me, told me it gave me some discretion. I signed where she pointed. I'll be honest, Nathan. I didn't read every line. I assumed she and you had. He nodded. Your wife was not naive, Edgar, he said. She didn't doubt your love for the kids. She doubted their respect for boundaries. He placed the old amendment next to the new draft and turned them so I could see. His pen tapped a paragraph titled, Stewardship Clause. Here, he said, running his finger along the lines. This clause gives you sole discretion over any distribution of principal until your death. You can choose to release funds, or you can choose to withhold them. No one can force you to release money from the trust. I squinted, reading the tiny print. Words like unilateral authority, discretion, non-delegable. You also have, he continued, the power to redirect the entire trust corpus to other vehicles. Charities, protective funds. If, and I quote, in the trustee's considered judgment, the named beneficiaries demonstrate reckless financial behavior or attempt to exploit the trustee's age, infirmity, or grief. He sat back, watching my face. The words sank in slow, like heavy stones through water. Margaret's last year, all those times she'd brushed off my worries with, I've tightened things, Ed, flashed through my head like a film on fast forward. She knew this was coming, I whispered. She knew them. She knew me. And I signed my name under hers without reading what she was saving me from. Nathan's eyes softened. She hoped it wouldn't be necessary, he said quietly. She told me that. Maybe they'll surprise us. Nathan, she said. But if they don't, I need Ed to be able to say no without them bullying him. I swallowed hard. The paper in front of me blurred for a second, and I had to blink it clear. And this new thing? I asked, thumbing the draft they'd tried to hand me. Where does that fit? He pulled it back toward him, flipped to a section buried in the middle. Here, he said, in order to streamline trustee obligations and reduce administrative burden, the undersigned hereby waives the stewardship clause dated. He tapped the date with his pen. That's the one Margaret added. This document cancels it. He flipped a page. And here, he went on, the undersigned consents to the assignment of beneficial interest to Ridgeview Acquisitions, LLC, in consideration for the acquisition of real property as selected by the beneficiaries. He looked up at me over the rims of his glasses. In plain English, Edgar, they're trying to strip you of your discretion and hand effective control of the trust to a limited liability company. Once you sign this, you're not a steward anymore. You're a rubber stamp. Ridgeview, I said slowly. What do we know about them? He swiveled to his computer, fingers surprisingly nimble on the keys for a man his age. He typed, clicked, frowned. Ridgeview Acquisitions, LLC. He read off the screen. Filed 2 years ago. Registered agent is some outfit in the city that incorporates a dozen shells a day. Mailing address. He clicked again, then let out a soft whistle. Suite 519 East Main, he said. That's the high-rise with all the startups and consultancies. And according to this, Ridgeview shares a floor with. He peered closer. Nexum Strategies. Isn't that where Daniel's been working? My hands balled on my knees. Last I heard, I said. Called it a strategic advisement firm. Sounded like they advised people how to part with their money. Nathan sat back, steepling his fingers much like the sales agent had, only I trusted his thinking. At best, he said slowly, this is a glaring conflict of interest. Your son is on both sides of the table, beneficiary and, effectively, seller. At worst, it's self-dealing. And with you in your 70s, grieving, them pressuring you to sign away $1 million. He let the sentence trail off. He didn't need to finish it. Elder financial abuse, I said. The words tasted like rust. He nodded. If it ever went to a judge, that's exactly how it would look. I sat there, breathing, feeling the weight of both documents under my hands. One, drawn up at a laminate table by people who saw me as a walking checkbook. The other, signed in a cramped office by a woman who'd seen this coming long before I had. You're not powerless here, Edgar, Nathan said gently. They've depended on you not reading, not asking for a long time. But in this case, you are the only signature that matters. Then I'll use it, I said. The words surprised me with how solid they sounded. Like a part of me had been waiting to say them since the restaurant loan, or maybe even before that. Nathan nodded once. You have options, he said. You can simply refuse to sign anything that waives your stewardship. Let them huff and puff. The trust stays intact. Or, I asked, though I already knew there was more. Or we go on offense, he replied. Formally document their attempted coercion. Redesignate the trust's purpose, if you choose. There are elder abuse clinics, scholarship funds, community projects. Margaret told me more than once she didn't want that money to end up in a single pair of hands if those hands were grabbing. I thought of Margaret's face when she'd signed that amendment. The sadness, the resolve. If I just say no, I said slowly, they'll keep circling. New schemes, new papers, new ways to push, likely, he agreed. If I move it, I went on, re-aim it, there's nothing left for them to circle. Nothing in that trust, he said. You'd still have your own savings, your house. They might set their sights there. I almost smiled. They already have, I said. But one problem at a time. He studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. If you want this to hold up, he said, we'll need proof of their intent. Their words. Their pressure. Are you willing to let them talk freely in front of witnesses? I thought of the way Daniel's voice had sounded last night, soothing and sharp all at once. Of Olivia's stage whisper about how Mom would have just signed. Of the mortgage man and the sales agent chatting about holder clients who fell in love with renderings. I'm a machinist, Nathan, I said. I know how to let a gear spin until it strips its own teeth. His mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. Then let's design this carefully, he said. For Margaret. And for you. When I left Nathan's house, the sun was high and sharp, the way it only is on cold days. The world had that brittle clarity where every shadow looks darker. I sat in my truck for a minute with my hands on the wheel, feeling something shift inside me. For days it felt like things were happening to me. Margaret getting sick. Margaret dying. The kids making plans without me. But as I sat there with the stewardship clause fresh in my mind, it occurred to me that for the first time in a long time, I was about to make something happen. Back home, the house greeted me with its usual creaks and sighs. I hung up my coat, walked past Margaret's chair, and went straight to the little desk in the corner where we kept the computer. The laptop was old, the kind that takes a full minute to cough itself awake, but it did the job. Once it finally lit up, I opened my email. There, like he'd promised, was a message from Nathan with 2 attachments. Draft 1 Trust Release SAW for appearance purposes. The first one was labeled, Draft 2 Trust Reallocations. Margaret Mercer Care Fund, said the second. I clicked the first. It looked a lot like the papers Daniel had brought, but there were subtle differences. The stewardship clause stayed in place. No mention of Ridgeview. On the surface, though, to an untrained eye, or a son who thought his father was too wary to read, it would look like the thing they wanted. The second document was shorter, cleaner. It redirected the entire trust corpus into a new vehicle, the Margaret Mercer Trades Scholarship Fund. A set of scholarships for kids in our county who wanted to go to trade school. Machinists, welders, electricians, and a small carve-out to support caregiver respite services at the local adult day program. Margaret's own words echoed in my head. Not everyone needs a framed diploma to build a good life, Ed. Somebody's got to keep the lights on and the machines running. I sat back, letting it sink in. 1 document to show my kids. 1, someday soon, to sign for my wife. Before I did anything else, I opened another window and logged into my ancient email account. I scrolled through the old messages, the ones I'd never bothered to delete. There they were, scattered across years. From Daniel, 3 Christmases ago. Dad, we should really talk about deploying Mom's million. It's just sitting there doing nothing. From Olivia, 6 months after that. If you just stop being so old school about the trust, we could actually get ahead. Little barbs, all with the same tip. Mom's million. Our million. As if my name weren't on the trustee line. As if Margaret's weren't on the documents. I forwarded a handful of the worst ones to Nathan, adding a note, for your file, pattern of entitlement. Then I flipped the phone open and scrolled through my texts. Same tone there. Danielle. When you finally loosen the purse strings. Olivia. Once you and Mom are done with nursing homes and all that, what's left should go to the ones actually living life. I didn't have to embellish anything. The story wrote itself. After that, I grabbed my keys again and drove into town. First stop was the bank. Not the big branch by the mall where nobody knew my name, but the small one on Maple where the tellers still baked cookies at Christmas. Inside, behind the counter, was Sarah. I'd watched her go from a teenager counting pennies for a summer job to a young woman who now managed the line. Mr. Mercer, she said when she saw me. I was wondering when you'd come in. I was very sorry to hear about Mrs. Mercer. Thank you, Sarah, I said.
You got a minute?
For you? Of course. She waved another teller over and stepped out to the side desk with me. I got an alert about a pending wire the other day, I said, keeping my voice level. 200,000 from the trust. For an earnest money thing. Lakeshore Ridge. I'm not authorizing anything today. I just want to know what you saw on your end. She bit her lip. I'm not really supposed to talk about. I'm the trustee, I said gently. It's my wife's trust. If someone is trying to move that money, I have a right to know who told you what. She weighed that, then nodded. Your son and daughter were in here, she said quietly. Yesterday morning. They wanted to make sure everything was set. They said you'd be in shortly to sign the final power. They made it sound like you were on board, just a little slow. What exactly did they say? I asked. Her cheeks colored. Daniel joked that you'd sign anything if the font was big enough, she said. And Olivia said you'd be relieved. To get the trust out of your hair. She glanced at me. I'm sorry. It made me uncomfortable. That's why I flagged the wire for co-signer verification. I didn't feel right pushing it through. You did the right thing, I said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. She smiled, wobbly. So you're not. I'm not authorizing it, I said. If anything comes through with my name and not my signature on it, I want you to treat it like a crime scene. Her eyes widened, but she nodded. Yes, sir. When I left the bank, I felt, for the first time in days, like someone under 40 was on my side. Next stop was the community center, a faded brick building across from the high school. Inside, a bulletin board listed support groups and after-school programs. A woman I knew by sight, Ruth, ran the place. Egger, she said, looking up from a stack of flyers. Haven't seen you here since you and Margaret came to the senior dance. Doctor said my knees couldn't survive another jitterbug. I joked weakly. Then I grew serious. I wanted to ask you something. Hypothetically. She raised an eyebrow. If someone wanted to set up a small fund, I said, for local kids going to trade school. Maybe also help out folks caring for spouses with dementia or cancer. Does the center have a way to administer something like that? Or a partner who does? Her face lit up in a way that made me feel both warm and ashamed I hadn't thought of this sooner. We do, she said. There's a community foundation we work with. They handle the legal side, we connect them with the people. Are you thinking of doing something in Margaret's name? Thinking, I said. No promises yet, but get me the information. She rifled through a drawer, handed me a brochure. If you do, she said softly, it would help a lot of people. Margaret was always the first to sign up to cook or drive or sit with someone. This would fit. I tucked the brochure into my coat, right next to my heart. Back at the house, the light was going gold through the living room windows. Shadows of branches moved across the floor. I stood there for a minute, listening to the quiet, then walked to the wall phone. I dialed Daniel's number. It rang twice. Hey, Dad, he answered, a little wary. Son, I said, putting a tremor into my voice I didn't entirely have to fake. I've been thinking about that house. About what you said about security for the family. On the other end, his tone changed instantly, brightening. Yeah, I think I'm ready to talk about it, I said. Why don't you and Olivia come over tomorrow evening? Bring whoever you need. Your mortgage fellow. Maybe the developer man. Let's make it formal so my old head can wrap around it. There was a brief silence. Then a rush of air as he let out a breath. You won't regret this, Dad, he said, excitement bubbling up. We'll all be under one roof before the snow. I'll call the broker and Clark from Ridgeview. We'll bring the docs, go through them step by step. You'll see. This is the right move. Step by step. I echoed. That's all I ask. After we hung up, I called Nathan. You want me there as your lawyer or as a witness? He asked after I explained. Both, I said. You can bring one of your red folders if it makes them nervous. Then I walked next door and knocked on the Miller's door. They'd loved Margaret like she was their own sister. She'd watched their kids when they were small. Joan blinked at me. Oh, honey. How are you holding up? One foot in front of the other, I said. I'm having a few people over tomorrow night. Daniel and Olivia, some folks of theirs. Nathan. Thought I'd do a little toast to Margaret while everyone's here. Would you and Tom come? She'd like that. Her eyes misted. Of course, she said. We wouldn't miss it. Later, I climbed the pull-down stairs to the attic, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The air up there smelled like dust and cedar. In the far corner, under an old tarp, sat a small metal cash box. I carried it down like it was made of crystal. At the dining room table, I opened it. Inside were photos. Faded Polaroids of babies in bassinets, Margaret in her welding mask, kids at birthdays. Under those, bundled in a rubber band, were a few letters. Margaret's handwriting on the envelopes, addressed to me but never mailed. I opened one. Her words were neat, the ink a little smudged, as if her hand had shaken. Eid, it began. If you're reading this, it means I didn't find the courage to say it out loud. She wrote about the kids. About their spending, their assumptions. About how she worried they'd see us, and our savings, as a safety net they'd never have to weave for themselves. I know you hate conflict, she'd written. I know you feel guilty every time you say no. So I went to Nathan. I did what I could on paper. The rest you'll have to do with your spine. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the box, and set the whole thing beside my recliner. Armor didn't always look like steel. In the garage, buried in a drawer under old shop manuals, I found the little digital voice recorder I used to dictate notes when my hands were too greasy for a pen. I popped in fresh batteries and clicked it on. A tiny red light glowed. "Testing," I said, holding it up. "This is Edgar Mercer." On playback, my own voice came back to me, a little raspier than I liked, but clear enough. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my shirt and buttoned it. The shape was small, almost unnoticeable. In the living room, behind the big fern Margaret had insisted would bring some life into this place. I tucked an older, cheaper recorder I'd found in the same drawer, just in case. "Belt and suspenders," I muttered. "Just like Margaret liked it." For a moment I stood in the middle of the room, looking around. The framed photos on the wall. The Afghan on the back of the couch. The indentation in the carpet where her chair had sat for 30 years. "I'm sorry it's come to this," I said quietly. Whether I was talking to her, to myself, or to the house, I couldn't say. Back at the table, I pressed record again, lifted the device to my mouth. "State your name for the record," I said, as if I were some fancy investigator. I couldn't help the small, grim smile that tugged at my mouth. Tomorrow, they'd do the talking. I clicked it off and slid it back into my pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. They arrived in a staggered little parade, like actors drifting onto a stage without realizing the play had already been written. By 6:30, the living room was as ready as I could make it. Margaret's photo sat on the coffee table in a simple frame, her smiling in the backyard with dirt on her cheek and a tomato in her hand. I'd put 2 candles on either side, lit them, and turned off the harsh overhead light. The room glowed in soft amber, shadows pooling in the corners. On the table beside her picture were 3 neat stacks of paper in manila envelopes. Under my shirt, the recorder was a small, hard presence, its red light winking against my chest. I'd tested it twice. It remembered better than I did. First came the knock I knew best. Daniel and Olivia together. I opened the door to find them standing there with expressions pitched somewhere between solemn and excited. Daniel wore a navy suit I hadn't seen before, the kind with narrow lapels you only see in magazines. Olivia was in a black dress that sparkled when she moved, too fancy for my shabby little house. Between them, like a peace offering, they held a plastic-wrapped bouquet of lilies and roses from the nice easel of the grocery store. "Hey, Dad," Olivia said, thrusting the flowers toward me. "We brought something for Mom." "Thank you," I said, taking them. The cellophane crackled in my hand. She always did like lilies. They stepped in, doing that quick scan people do when they're checking whether the set is right. Their eyes slid over Margaret's photo, the candles, the cleared coffee table, the envelopes. "This looks nice," Daniel said. "Like a real meeting." "Thought she deserved a little moment," I replied. "With everyone here." Right on cue, another car door slammed outside. Through the lace curtain, I saw a glossy sedan pull away from the curb, leaving 2 men in its wake. One was short and thick through the middle, his tie a garish shade of red. The other was taller, with a practiced tan and an expensive haircut. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mrs. Mercer," the shorter one said, sticking out a hand. His grip was firm, the kind that tries a little too hard. "Tom Miller from Horizon Capital." He said it like everyone should know the name. We spoke on the phone a couple of times about the wire. The taller man stepped forward, smile perfectly calibrated. "Graham Clark," he said. "Ridgeview Acquisitions. First of all, let me say how sorry I am about your loss. Daniel and Olivia have told us so much about Mrs. Mercer." "I'm sure they have," I said. I stood back. Coming out of the cold. While they shrugged off their coats, another car rolled up. I heard the crunch of gravel and the familiar murmur of my neighbors' voices. Joan called softly from the porch. "We brought a pie. I hope that's all right." I could see the confusion on Daniel's face when he spotted the Millers. For a second, his slick confidence wobbled. "Hey,
Joan.
he Sam. "Didn't know you were." "I invited them." I cut in. "They loved your mother. I wanted them here when we raise a glass for her." Behind them, one more figure appeared, Nathan. In his rumpled gray suit and old wool overcoat, a thin leather briefcase in hand. Evening, Edgar, he said, stepping inside. Folks. Daniel stiffened. Why is Halpern here? He asked me quietly. I gave him my best confused blink. I told you, I said. My head's not what it was. Thought it would be smart to have him around, just in case I have questions. The room filled up in layers. Neighbors perched politely on the edge of the couch, broker and developer taking the chairs nearest the coffee table, Daniel and Olivia hovering like nervous hosts. Nathan remained by the bookshelf, letting others take center stage. I shuffled into the kitchen and busied myself with the coffee pot, making sure my hands shook just enough when I carried the tray back in. Sorry if I forget names, I said as I set cups down. Since Margaret passed, my memory's gotten patched in places. Totally understandable, Miller from Horizon said in a soothing tone, taking a cup. Grief does that. I could feel the recorder against my sternum, warm now from my body heat. I slipped a thumb into my pocket and pressed the tiny button through the fabric. The red light glowed again, unseen. I appreciate you all coming, I said, settling into my recliner. Feels right in a way. Margaret always said money talk ought to happen around a table, not in some faceless office. Olivia crossed one leg over the other, the sparkle on her dress catching the candlelight. We told the kids, she said, glancing at Joan and Tom, about the new house. About how we're going to have a room named after Grandma. A little sewing room like she had here. I saw Joan's eyes widen slightly. She whispered to her husband. They planned all this before Margaret was in the ground. He hushed her gently, but not before the words had hung in the air for a moment. Daniel chose not to hear. Dad, he said, taking a breath like a man starting a pitch. I wanted to show you something. For everyone's benefit. He nodded to Clark, who dug into his leather satchel and pulled out a glossy folder. He opened it and laid it on the coffee table, turning it toward the room. There in full color was the Lakeview Summit plan. Sunlight on fake water, modern furniture, happy models. This is the property your children have selected, Clark said smoothly. It's one of our last high-end lots in Phase 2. Unobstructed lake view. Prime location. We're actually lucky your family came along when you did, he added. Ridgeview's been bleeding taxes on that parcel. We're glad your family's ready to step up. I watched Daniel flinch at that. Just a little. And you own this? I asked, voice mild.
Ridgeview, I mean.
This house. Would do, Clark said. Ridgeview Acquisitions holds the deed presently. Once we close, title will transfer to Daniel and Olivia. The trust will have done its job. So Ridgeview owns the property now, I repeated. And who owns Ridgeview? Miller shifted in his seat. Clark's smile thinned. It's a group of investors, he said. Standard structure. You don't need to worry about that. It's all in the family, really. At least, that's what your son tells us, Miller added with a chuckle. Daniel jumped in quickly. It's complicated, Dad, he said. Structuring stuff. Tax efficiency, you'd hate it. Point is, the trust buys the house from Ridgeview, Ridgeview pays out to its owners, and you get a beautiful place where we can all live and take care of you. Mom didn't spend her life clipping coupons so you could rot in this old place, Dad. Olivia said softly. She wanted us to thrive. This is us thriving, together. Nathan caught my eye from across the room, raised one eyebrow. You hearing this? I murmured low enough I thought only he'd catch it. Every word, he replied. Miller cleared his throat, setting his coffee down. The good news is, he said, we're ready to go. The loan is conditionally approved. All we need is your signature, Mr. Mercer, on the trust authorization. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers with colored tabs, sliding them toward me. Just sign where the stickers are, and we'll do the rest. Daniel leaned forward eagerly. Once Dad signs, he said, not bothering to lower his voice, Ridgeview gets paid, I get my cut, and everybody wins. He realized what he'd said half a beat too late and glanced at Clark, who gave him a tight little nod and an even tighter smile. I picked up the top page, squinted at it like the letters were dancing. So, I said slowly, if I sign, the million moves out of the trust into Ridgeview. You two get the house. And if I die next week, that's that. House in your name's no way back. Exactly, Daniel said, mistaking my slow tone for confusion he could fix. It'll be locked and safe from nursing homes, creditors, anybody. That's the beauty of this, Dad. You're protecting the family. Miller grinned. You're lucky to have such forward-thinking kids, Mr. Mercer, he said. Most folks your age cling to every penny. Make it harder than it has to be. Joan made a noise in her throat that sounded like she'd swallowed a stone. I let my shoulders sag a little farther, as if the weight of the papers was too much. I do get confused, I said. Since Margaret, dates, names, trusts, Ridgeview, Ridgepoint, all these are words. I gave a self-deprecating laugh. Reminds me of when the shop got new equipment and I had to learn all the new buttons. Exactly, Olivia said, reaching to pat my knee. This is just new buttons. We'll handle the panel. You just have to say yes. I tapped the corner of the stack with one finger. This says assignment of beneficial interest. I mused aloud. That go to Ridgeview too. It's just paper, Daniel said quickly. You're overthinking it. Please, Dad. We've already told the kids about the house. We showed them pictures. They're so excited. You're not going to break their hearts, are you? He said it like he wasn't really asking about hearts at all. The room was very quiet. Even the clock seemed to be holding its tick. I took a breath, letting it rattle a bit. All right? I said finally. All right. I understand everyone wants this to move along. I'm slowing things down. Relief flashed across Daniel's face. Olivia's shoulders dropped. Miller and Clark exchanged the kind of satisfied glance men do when a deal is about to land. I paused, looked at Margaret's photo, at her smile frozen forever around that backyard tomato. Before I put my name on anything, I'd like to say a few words. About her. About what this all means. If you don't mind an old man rambling. Olivia smiled, already imagining the sentimental clip for her followers. Of course, Daddy, she said. That's beautiful. Make it quick. Miller said under his breath, checking his watch. Bank closes at 8. I set the papers down gently and pushed myself up out of the recliner. My knees popped in protest, but I stood taller than I had in weeks. Instead of reaching for the pen Daniel was holding out, I walked over to the TV stand. The remote lay there, black and harmless. I picked it up, weighing it in my hand. Before I put my name on anything, I said, turning back to the room. Let's make sure everyone here knows exactly what's going on. I pointed the remote at the dark screen and pressed the button. The screen blinked to life with a blue glow that washed over everyone's faces and made their eyes look a little hollower. No happy families this time. No gleaming kitchens. Just a plain white background and black text. The kind you see on court documents and contracts. Nathan had loaded it earlier from a thumb drive while everyone was still taking off their coats. At the top, in bold letters, it read, Excerpt Margaret Mercer Family Trust amended. Below that, a paragraph was enlarged so even my old eyes could read it from the recliner. Section 70 Stewardship Clause. The trustee, Edgar L. Mercer, shall retain sole and exclusive discretion to withhold, approve, or redirect any and all distributions of principal during his lifetime. Any attempt by beneficiaries to exert pressure upon, mislead, or exploit the trustee's age, infirmity, or grief shall constitute grounds for removal of such beneficiaries and reallocation of trust assets, at the trustee's discretion. The room went very still. Joan leaned forward, squinting. Miller from Horizon cleared his throat, suddenly less sure of his jokes. Clark's tan seemed to pale a shade. Nathan stepped away from the bookshelf and came to stand beside the coffee table, his voice steady as he read the passage aloud. Mr. Mercer has full discretion, he emphasized, to withhold or redirect any and all distributions if, in his judgment, the beneficiaries attempt to exploit his age or condition. The words settled in the air like dust motes, slow and undeniable. Daniel laughed. It was a thin, brittle sound. What is this? He scoffed. Some scare tactic. Dad, come on. You don't even remember half of what's in those documents. I remember signing right under your mother's name, I said. And I remember trusting her when she said she'd tighten the bolts. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out the little recorder. It felt heavier now that it wasn't hidden. I set it on the coffee table next to the neat stacks of their papers, its red light still burning steadily. What I don't have to remember, I said quietly, is what you said, because I tapped the recorder. Does it for me. Before anyone could lunge, I pressed play. The tiny speaker filled the room with familiar voices, flattened and tinny but unmistakable. Once Dad signs, Ridgeview gets paid, I get my cut, and everybody wins. Daniel's own words from not 10 minutes earlier. His face drained of color as if someone had pulled a plug. Click. You aren't thinking as clearly as you used to. That's normal at your age. Let us carry this weight for you. His voice again, patronizing, perfectly preserved. Click. We already promised the seller your million. You're not going to break the kids' hearts, are you? That was Olivia, her breath hitching now as she heard herself. I let the clips play in a short, ugly loop. No need for more. The neighbors stared, eyes wide. Miller stared at the floor. Clark stared at the door, like he was calculating how fast he could get out. I didn't just get old, son, I said when the last echo faded. You didn't just forget your mother's funeral. You tried to turn it into a closing date. I never said. Daniel began, rising from his chair, but Nathan cut him off with a look. You said exactly that, Nathan said, and more. On the record, in front of witnesses. The clerk held up his hands. I had no idea Mr. Mercer wasn't fully informed, he said quickly. Daniel assured us that my dad was on board. Daniel snapped, rounding on him. Which he was until you brought this theatrics into it. Clark took a step back, palms out. Ridgeview engages in legitimate transactions, he said. If there's a misunderstanding about the trust, that's between you and your father. Is that so? Nathan murmured. We'll see if the state regulator agrees. He turned back to me. Edgar, he said. You told me you'd made a decision. I nodded. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth, but my voice came out calm. I will not be signing your authorization, I said, looking at Daniel, then Olivia, then the slick men they'd brought into my living room. What I signed this afternoon with Mr. Halpern is a reallocation of Margaret's trust. In full. Olivia's mouth dropped open. You what? She whispered. The funds are being designated. I went on. To the Margaret Mercer Trades Scholarship Fund at the community college, and to a caregiver respite program at the day center downtown. Kids who want to learn a trade will get a hand up. People looking after sick spouses will get a break your mother never did. Daniel surged to his feet, face flushing dark. You burned our inheritance, he shouted. Are you insane? I didn't burn anything, I said. I planted it somewhere it might actually grow something worthwhile. Nathan lifted a red, covered folder from his briefcase and set it on the table with a soft thump. The reallocation agreement is executed, he said calmly. Wire instructions have been sent to the bank. The transfer is scheduled for Monday morning when the system opens. Any attempt to interfere with that, in light of the stewardship clause and the evident pressure we've just documented, will be viewed very poorly by any court. Miller's face had gone the color of old paper. Wet, he said. If the trust doesn't fund, the loan can't close. Without the down payment, our approval is void. He swung his gaze to Daniel. And the earnest money. Daniel rounded on him. You said we had time. He snapped. You said. I said. Miller shot back. That if your father signed tonight, we'd be fine. You assured me that was a formality. You told me he was already on board. Their voices grew louder, overlapping. Clark tried to slide in, distance himself. We can discuss deposit terms separately, he said, hands fluttering. Ridgeview's position is clear. We carried this property for 2 years. If the deal falls, we retain. He cut himself off when Nathan turned his way. While we're on that, Nathan said, his tone mild but his eyes sharp. For the record, Mr. Clark. Who are the beneficial owners of Ridgeview Acquisitions? Clark smoothed his tie. It's a private investment vehicle, he replied. I'm bound by confidentiality. Our investors rely on. What can subpoena your records if necessary? Nathan said pleasantly. If there's been any self-dealing involving a family trust, the state will be very interested. Self-dealing. The legal word for what my gut had smelled days ago. Daniel's jaw worked. You can't do this, he said, turning back to me. We'll sue. You can't just steal our future like this. You can hire a dozen lawyers, I said. With money you don't have. It won't change the signature I already put on different papers. I looked down at Margaret's photo, at the tomato in her hand, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. Then I looked back up at the room. I also went to see my own estate planner, I said, separate from the trust, my will. Olivia's shoulders jerked as if I'd slapped her. You changed it, she asked. I did, I said. I left each of you something. One item that mattered. Daniel, you'll get my father's watch. He would have wanted his grandson to have it, even if his grandson forgot what time his mother's burial was. Olivia, you'll get your mother's sewing box. She spent a lifetime making things from scraps. Tears sprang to her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were for the box or the zeros she'd been planning to add to her balance. And the rest, I continued, goes where Margaret would have wanted, to people who need it, not to people who see it as a bailout for bad bets. Dad, you can't. Daniel started again, but Joan's voice cut across his. Good for you, Edgar, she said, surprising all of us. Her hands were knotted in her lap, but her chin was up. Margaret would be proud. A lump rose in my throat that had nothing to do with age. I enabled you, I said, turning back to my children. For years. I let your mother talk me into loans and second chances, and won more breaks. Every time I caved, I thought I was helping. I was really just teaching you that there would always be one more check to cash. I took a breath. That ends tonight. I won't finance your greed. Not with her money. Not with mine. Silence fell, thick and stunned. Olivia's face crumpled. We're your family, she said, voice breaking. You're supposed to, you raised us. You're supposed to take care of us. I did take care of you, I said softly. I fed you, clothed you, educated you. I gave you a roof, a shop you never had to work in, a mother who bent herself into knots to excuse every selfish thing you did. At some point, taking care of you turned into carrying you. I'm too old and too tired for that anymore. You're abandoning us, Daniel said through clenched teeth. I'm setting you down, I corrected. There's a difference. Miller stood up abruptly, gathering his papers. This conversation has clearly gone in a direction beyond financing, he said. Horizon will be withdrawing the loan application. We can't proceed without the trust funds and, frankly, with this family dynamic, our risk profile. Would get it, Daniel snapped. You cover your own backside. Fine. Clark took the opportunity to slip his folder back into his satchel. Ridgeview will be retaining the deposit per the contract, he said briskly. You were fully apprised of that term, Daniel. If you have an issue, take it up with your advisors. He nodded once at Nathan, once at me, and practically bolted for the door. The sound of it closing echoed. Nathan packed his briefcase calmly. I'll be in touch Monday after the wires clear, he said to me. Then, to Daniel and Olivia, I would strongly advise you to seek independent counsel before attempting any further contact regarding the trust. Any appearance of continued pressure could be unwise. He left quietly, with the Millers following, both looking like they just walked out of a play where they'd paid for comedy and gotten tragedy. That left me and my children standing amid the wreckage of their plans. Daniel's shoulders sank. For a moment, under the expensive suit and the anger, I saw the boy who'd come home, scruffed and bruised, the first time life had told him no. He looked lost. This isn't over, he muttered, but it sounded weak, even to my ears. It is, I said. At least this part. He grabbed his coat, fumbling with the sleeve, and stalked to the door. Olivia stayed a moment longer, staring at Margaret's photo through her tears. How can you be so cold? She whispered. She wouldn't. She'd never. She went to Nathan a year ago, I said. She added that stewardship clause because she was afraid this exact thing would happen. She trusted me enough to tighten the bolts, even if she couldn't tighten you. Olivia's mouth opened, then closed. She picked up her purse with shaking hands and followed her brother out without another word. When the door finally shut behind them, the house went quiet again. No murmuring deals, no rustle of paper, no phones buzzing. Just the tick of the old clock and the faint hum of the fridge. I walked to the coffee table and picked up Margaret's picture. The candles had burned low, wax puddling in the saucers. Her smile looked the same as it always had, like she'd just told me a joke and was waiting to see if I got it. Tomorrow morning, I told her softly, they'll learn what it means to stand on their own feet. I set the photo back down gently, blew out the candles, and turned toward the hallway. There was a small suitcase in the closet that hadn't seen daylight in years. It was time to start packing. The next morning the sky was a clean, pale blue, the kind that makes yesterday's storm feel like something you dreamed. I had packed most of what I needed into a single suitcase the night before. A few shirts, my shaving kit, Margaret's old cardigan that still smelled faintly of her. The rest of the house was untouched. The dent in the couch cushion still shaped like her, the ring from Daniel's coffee still on the table. I'd arranged for a neighbor's grandson to come by and water the plants, and for a realtor to meet me in a week, one step at a time. Instead of heading straight out of town, I asked the cab driver to take a detour. "Could you swing by Lakeshore Ridge?" I said, sliding into the back seat with my suitcase beside me. He glanced at me in the mirror, shrugged. "Sure thing, mister." "You house hunting?" "Something like that," I said. The sales center looked different in the morning light. Less glamorous, more like what it was. A box with too much glass plunked down on scraped earth. The balloons were half deflated now, bobbing weakly in the breeze. The big P.A. Sasui A almost soldo banner still hung over the door, but one thing was missing. The red Sol D strip that had covered a particular lot number in the little site map by the door had been peeled off, leaving a faint outline behind. As we rolled past, I saw two familiar figures through the glass. Daniel, in yesterday's suit, tie hanging loose, hair mussed in a way that wasn't stylish this time. Olivia barefaced, her mascara from the night before scraped away, but leaving dark smudges under her eyes. They stood on opposite sides of the reception desk, voices raised, hands cutting the air. Behind the desk, Kelsey from the other day had lost her cheerful smile. Her arms were crossed, her mouth tight. Miller hovered near the conference room, looking at his watch, already checked out of whatever story they were trying to spin. "I'm dropping you right here," the driver asked. "No," I said. "Keep going." I watched my children through the glass as we passed. For a moment, Daniel's gaze met mine, more by accident than intention. His mouth opened, but the car had already moved on. A part of me, the same part that had caved on the restaurant, on the credit cards, on the too many second chances, wanted to tell the driver to stop. To get out. To walk in and say, "All right, just this once more." But that part of me had nearly signed away Margaret's legacy to an LLC with my son's fingerprints all over it. That part of me was why we were here in the first place. We turned off the boulevard and headed back toward my street. When we pulled up in front of my house, I wasn't surprised to see them there too. Daniel and Olivia, parked crooked again, suitcases and garment bags scattered across the front lawn like washed-up luggage. Someone, maybe a neighbor, maybe them, had brought out two lawn chairs, and they sat there hunched, like kids waiting outside the principal's office. They both stood as the cab rolled to a stop. "Wait here a minute, please," I told the driver. He nodded. I stepped out into the crisp air. The grass was wet, the ruts from their tires already starting to turn the soil to muck. Olivia got to me first. "Daddy," she said, voice raw. "Please. We're sorry, okay? We said some awful things. We can fix this. Just help us get through the next couple weeks and..." Daniel cut it in, less pleading, more brittle. "The deposit is gone," he said. "Miller just confirmed it. Clark too. We're out $100,000. If we don't get something fast, we're looking at Lyons collections. Worse. You don't want that for your own kids, do you?" They were shivering a little in the cold, but neither of them had thought to put on proper coats. They hadn't planned for weather any more than they'd planned for consequences. "I told the landlord we'd be out by the end of the month," Olivia added, tears spilling over. "We thought we'd be in the new place by then. Now he's got someone else lined up. We can't just go back. We can't crash with Jason's parents, they won't even look at him. We thought we could stay here just for a bit. Get our feet under us." Her eyes darted to the suitcase in my hand, then to the cab. "You're really leaving?" she whispered. "I am," I said. "I have some things I need to do. Places your mother and I never got to." Daniel barked out a humorless laugh. "Great timing," he said. "We're drowning? And you're off on some senior tour." I set my suitcase down on the walkway and reached into my coat. Their eyes followed my hand like magnets, hope flaring in both faces. I pulled out a thick manila envelope and held it out. Olivia grabbed it, fingers shaking, already tearing at the flap. Inside weren't checks or bank statements. There were printed pages, listings from the job board at the community center, addresses of staffing agencies, a sheet of phone numbers for financial counseling services. On top, a map of local apartment complexes with circled units that advertised first month free or income-based. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through. "Is this a joke?" "No," I said. "It's a start." Daniel looked like he'd been slapped. "You're really leaving us with nothing?" he demanded. "After everything we've done for you." I raised an eyebrow at that. "This was your inheritance long before there was money," I said. "Our example? How we worked, how we scraped, how we treated people. You just ignored it." Olivia shook her head, hair flying. "We can't live on a few job ads," she sobbed. "We have bills now. Kids, you expect us to go work at some warehouse, some call center. I expect you," I said, "to do what your mother and I did. Take whatever honest work there is instead of waiting for the perfect thing to land in your lap." Margaret and I started with 2 hands, a brain, and the freedom to use them. That's all we had. We built from that. "So can you?" "You're abandoning us," Daniel said again, but there was less conviction in it this time. More fear. I looked at my house, at the peeling paint on the porch rail, the curtains Margaret had sewn, the spot where the rose bushes used to be. Then I looked back at them. "Some people think blood means debt," I said. "I learned it only means origin. Respect is something else. I love you both. That hasn't changed. But love isn't always handing over a check. Sometimes it's walking away, so the people you've carried might finally learn to walk on their own." Olivia clutched the envelope to her chest like it was both useless and the only thing tethering her to the ground. "What if we fail?" she whispered. "You probably will," I said gently. "A few times. So did we. So does everyone who isn't lying. But if I step in every time you wobble, you'll never feel your own legs under you." Daniel looked past me at the cab driver drumming his fingers on the wheel, clearly eager to be on his way. "Where are you even going?" he asked, like the answer might dictate whether he believed I'd really do it. "A cabin by the lake for a bit," I said. "Then maybe out west. Your mother always wanted to see the red rocks. I've got enough of my own savings to do that without touching a cent of the trust or the house. I plan to spend some of it on gas and cheap motels instead of granite countertops." Olivia's eyes filled again. "So that's it?" she asked. "You just drive away?" I picked up my suitcase and held her gaze for a long moment. "I finished the part of the job your mother and I were too soft to do together," I said quietly. "The rest is yours now." I turned to go, then paused. "If you ever decide you want a relationship that isn't based on what I can sign or send," I added over my shoulder, "you know how to reach me. But until then we all have work to do." In the cab, as we pulled away, I looked back once. They stood there among the suitcases and garment bags, staring at the envelope like it was written in another language. Maybe it was. The road out of town looked different when you weren't following an ambulance or a hearse. Fields stretched out on either side, brown and bare now, but I could picture them green again come spring. Somewhere beyond all that, a little rental cabin waited with mismatched furniture and a view of water that didn't care who owned what. As the miles rolled under the tires, the knot that had lived under my breastbone for months started to loosen. It hurt, watching my own children flounder. Any parent who says otherwise is lying. But holding on to them, propping them up with money and excuses, had become like trying to keep a grown tree in a flower pot. Roots twisted, branches stunted. Both of us miserable. Money doesn't spoil people, it just shows you what was already inside. Margaret and I thought we were helping by shielding our children from struggle. But we were really robbing them of the chance to build their own backbone. In the end, the greatest gift I could give them was the one we started with, the chance to stand on their own feet. Even if that meant stepping away. Respect for elders isn't measured in flowers at a funeral. It's measured in how you treat their life's work while they're still breathing. Whether you see them as human beings with histories and rights, or as old signatures waiting to be harvested. If you've listened this far, maybe you're weighing your own situation. Maybe there's someone in your life who treats you like an ATM, or assumes you'll sign any paper they slide across the table, because your eyes aren't what they used to be. Maybe you're wondering if you'd have the courage to do what I did. To cut off your own flesh and blood to protect the person you loved and the work you did together. Only you can answer that. But I'll ask you this. Has anyone ever treated you like a walking wallet, just because you're older, or because they think you won't understand the fine print? Have you ever felt that someone's kindness was really just an investment in a future inheritance? If my story stirred something in you, if you believe elders deserve respect and protection more than they deserve pressure and manipulation, then say so. Share your own stories. Would you be able to take a stand like this against your own children? And if you were in Daniel's or Olivia's shoes, what would you do differently? I'm just one old man telling you what happened in my little corner of the world. There are a lot more corners out there. If you want to hear more stories like mine, about greed, family, and what justice can look like when an old backbone finally stiffens, stick around. Add your voice. Let people know where you're listening from. As for me, there's a lake up ahead, and a sky my wife always wanted to see reflected in its surface. For the first time in a long time, the road in front of me feels like it belongs to me. The books are balanced. The rest of the ledger is mine to write.